Okay, so we're at number 23 right now. I want to invite those who have joined to please include your name and your designation and possibly country as well in the chat so that we can pick it up. We can probably allow for maybe 2 minutes to allow some persons to join. In the meantime, those who have just joined, please include your name, your position and country so that we can know who's on the training today. Thanks. Agnes, do you think it's a good time to start?
Yes, Myrtle, I think it's a good time. We're already 5 minutes past 10 and we have 25 participants. So I think we can begin.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Myrtle Drysdale-Octave, and on behalf of the Director General and staff of the OECS Commission, I welcome you to our training workshop on procurement guidelines for sustainable construction materials. First, allow me to do a very brief background. And as we know, the OECS countries are vulnerable to impacts of a variety of natural disasters which have occurred with increased frequency and intensity as we've experienced recently. And in addition, we all know what COVID-19 has done. These impacts have negatively affected our economy's physical infrastructure and social fabric and caused setback to our development. I believe that sustainable public procurement is a strategy that we can use as an OECS to bring economic, social, and environmental benefits to our member states through policies and practices that promote value for money in the procurement process by not just considering the initial purchase price, as sometimes we do, but the total cost of ownership throughout the asset life cycle. With this in mind, the OECS is in the process of implementing a public procurement intervention, as some of you know, and we have two major initiatives. The first one, which I will not labor on today, is the review of our procurement function for technical assistance, reviewing our procurement manual, etc. The second one is this initiative is part of the GCF Enhanced Direct Access Project, which aims to build institutional capacities of our pilot countries for climate adaptation planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation, as well as to strengthen their resilience to climate change related threats by improving the hurricane resilience of communities, buildings, homes, and businesses. Under this initiative, the OECS is responsible for a design the design of a sustainable procurement system for construction supplies in pilot countries of Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and Dominica. The OECS has partnered with United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, to provide technical assistance to assist the OECS in meeting the objectives of this project. And to date, we have a few good things happening, few milestones, and that we've met. In terms of the technical activities, a status assessment of legal framework for construction public procurement in 3 pilot countries was completed in February. Market readiness analysis was carried out. Key construction products were identified: lumber, concrete blocks, and aggregates, cement, sand, gravel. Their sustainability impacts were studied and recommendations were made for the inclusion of sustainability criteria of these products into public tendering. The insights and recommendations were shared during stakeholder consultations with the pilot countries, and subsequently an OECS model policy on sustainable construction materials was drafted and recently finalized after a month-long consultative process. Currently, we are completing action plans for the 3 pilot countries, as well as the procurement guidelines for construction materials on lumber, concrete blocks, and a training toolkit that will accompany the guidelines. In terms of knowledge dissemination and capacity building activities, we've done a few things. Last month, we conducted a 3-part webinar series focused on the Caribbean region entitled Shaping the Future Through Sustainable Public Procurement, which was launched in December 2020. The first webinar provided an introduction to sustainable public procurement and an overview of the status of the Caribbean region, of the status of sustainable public procurement in Latin America and the Caribbean region. The second webinar focused on best practices in sustainable public procurement in the Caribbean, with Belize, the Bahamas, Grenada, and Jamaica sharing their experiences. And the third and last focused on green building considerations. We also launched an 8-week online sustainable public procurement course through the OAS School of Governance virtual classroom in February. Full scholarships were provided to 22 public officials from the Eastern Caribbean. A project closing webinar event is being planned for early July, and where we hope to showcase the project, showing all of the progress that was made, as well as the various tools that were developed. A dedicated project webpage with all of the deliverables under the project will be presented at this event. I'm therefore very pleased to welcome you to one of our milestones for this project, and that's the training workshop on procurement guidelines for construction materials. The objective of today's training is to provide a general introduction to the public procurement guidelines for construction materials, which focuses on lumber and concrete blocks. The training will be delivered by our SPP expert, Sean Moss, who will review the procurement cycle and describe how sustainability considerations for lumber and concrete blocks can be integrated into public tendering across the procurement cycle. So I will now move into the training, and I will invite Sean, but I just want to give his bio. And Sean Moss is a procurement consultant with over 37 years experience in public procurement in both the public and private sector contexts across 6 continents. From 2012 to mid-2020, he was the World Bank's procurement coordinator for the Caribbean, where he led several transformational initiatives, including the development of new public procurement legislation in the OECS, launching the Caribbean Regional Procurement Training Center in Jamaica, implementing electronic government procurement in St. Lucia, and piloting sustainable public procurement in Grenada. He's currently working for the Caribbean Development Bank, supporting the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica in drafting new Public Procurement Act. He holds a Master's of Law in Public Procurement Law and Policy from the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. I know Sean personally through, well, professionally, and over the years, I have sought his expertise, his advice, and I have gotten very great support from Sean. And I know many of you on the call know him. And so with great appreciation, we invite Sean this morning to go through our training workshop this morning. Sean?
Thank you, Myrtle. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And we have a fairly sophisticated agenda today. If you look at the agenda, which is still on my screen, with a number of speakers, including Fareed and myself. We also have 3 polling exercises. So I'll try to keep everything to time. Just a matter of housekeeping in terms of questions. You can ask a question at any time in the chat. And when we come to the Q&A session, which is timed for 11:35, we will take your questions then. If you want to ask a question and actually speak and ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand at any time. And when we come to the Q&A session, we will take your questions then. And so we can have a little bit of an interaction at that stage. Any questions that we get in the chat, which we don't manage to answer in the session, for example, if we run out of time, we will answer by email after the webinar. So you can be sure that all your questions will be answered. I'm going to start by going through a quick overview of the procurement cycle. This is actually, it's a World Bank graphic. I borrowed it from them, but they wouldn't mind because I worked there for 23 years, so I'm sure they'd forgive me. This is the procurement cycle, which I think you all know very well. But from the particular angle of sustainability. And what it shows us is if you start with the definition of needs in the first stage and the assessment of benefits and impacts in the last stage, at each stage there is the opportunity to pursue sustainability objectives. Now, an ideal procurement process can serve all 3 areas of sustainability: environmental, economic, and social. But a good, even so, if you can only serve one of the objectives, that's still worth doing. And I think we should, as procurement specialists, we should look at every procurement that we work on as an opportunity to promote sustainability. Of course, we don't decide what governments procure. The end users department do that, the ministries do that. But when we receive a request from an end user department to launch a procurement process, we should be thinking about, well, how can we serve one or more sustainability objectives in this particular procurement transaction? And in that mindset, you need to think about things like, what is your country's sustainability policy? And each of the countries, the 3 pilot countries that we've been looking at, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, and Grenada, have sustainable development plans, which lay out very clearly what their sustainability priorities are. And clearly we should be guided by those national sustainable development strategies in thinking about procurement. We should also be thinking about what does the community need. Are there issues of unemployment or youth unemployment or inequality in pay between genders? Those can certainly be pursued in certain contracts, for example, for civil works. Naturally arising environmental risks, Myrtle mentioned, hurricane risk, and the many impacts that it had. And for example, Dominica's sustainable development strategy is all about building resilience to make the country the first climate resilient country in the world. So very clearly, if you're working in Dominica, that would be something you'd be thinking about when you're looking at doing a procurement. The next stage would be market research and planning, because you can't achieve the sustainability objectives of the procurement unless the market can give you what you need. Now, one of the great things about this project is the excellent research work that my colleague Jose Malero has done And I think you will have that document. If not, we'll make sure that you get it. He has actually researched in great detail the regional market within the OECS and the wider market, i.e. the main countries from which the OECS imports these inputs, lumber and the inputs into concrete blocks. So you know exactly what the capacity of the market is and from where you're buying, which goods are produced locally and which have to be imported. And we're going to get to describing those in some detail later on when we come to the sessions on lumber and on concrete blocks. Then you have to design the actual procurement process. What procurement method are you going to use? That would primarily be driven by your own legal framework. You get to the point of writing the specifications, which is very important in terms of making sure that you write a specification which will deliver the sustainability objectives that you need. And looking at standards, quality standards, technical standards, standards for bidders, for example. Does a bidder have ISO certification? All of those you'll be designing and thinking about when you come to design the procurement process. Next, you have the actual procurement part itself, the sourcing process, which is running the tender, bid evaluation, assessing the quality of solutions that will be offered to you in terms of how sustainable are the solutions offered, and applying either pass-fail criteria or rated criteria. Now, Myrtle mentioned earlier about life cycle costing. That's an invaluable tool in sustainability. I don't see a great use for it with these two materials because life cycle costing is generally used for things like industrial equipment or cars, for example, where you have extensive operating and maintenance costs during the life of the asset. You don't really have that with lumber and concrete blocks because you install that, you use it over 20, 30, 40 years. There isn't really a big need for operation and maintenance. So we're not recommending that you do life cycle costing for these two particular products. Once the contract is awarded, and of course you have contract implementation, setting, for example, KPIs that you may want, key performance indicators for the contractor. This is absolutely key because what the bidder promises to deliver in his bid may be all very well, and he may win the contract on the basis of those promises, but you may lose those expected gains unless you keep his feet to the fire when it comes to contract implementation and monitoring his performance to make sure that you get the sustainability advances that you're expecting. So for example, if you're pursuing social objectives such as reducing youth unemployment, creating apprenticeships for youths in a construction contract, you need to have a way of monitoring to make of the workforce of the contractor while the works are going on to make sure that he is actually employing the percentage of the number of youth and giving them the training opportunities that you demanded in your bidding document and that he offered in his bid. And then the final part is the assessment of sustainability impacts. That is a whole science on its own. We're not going to cover it in great detail here, but I do have some resources to share with you later on about how to go about that. Indeed, UNEP has published extensively on that subject. Now, before we go further, I think I'm right in saying that we have the first polling exercise. So here we go. So we have 3 polling exercises. This is the first one. And given that very brief overview of the procurement cycle and the opportunities for sustainability gains at each stage of the procurement cycle, we want to ask you what you think would be the stage of the procurement process where you have the most, where you can have the most effect, the most impact. So the question is, at which stage in the procurement cycle is it most effective to implement sustainability considerations? Is it initial considerations that we talked about, need definition, setting priorities, market research and planning, the actual design of the procurement process and how you design the evaluation criteria, the rest of it, sourcing and the procurement process itself, contract administration, or the assessment of sustainability impacts. You can choose as many as you like. We would suggest, in order to make the responses more intelligible, that you choose a maximum of 3. And you have a minute to do that, starting now. Okay, so I think we can close the polling now. We're at 50 seconds, 50. Yeah, I started a little bit late, so we're just over a minute. Okay, so here we have the results from everyone who participated in the poll answers. Very interesting. So there are 2 top ranked. There are 2 which are much more highly ranked than the others. The first one is the needs definition. The initial considerations, the first stage of the procurement cycle. The second one is market research and planning. So initial considerations, need definition is 77%. Now, I think people chose up to 3. So this is the most popular choice, initial considerations. The second one is market research and planning. Then the design of the procurement arrangements, and then sourcing procurement itself. Contract administration gets, the numbers are out of order. Impact assessment at the end is 15% and contract administration is 4%. That's fascinating, and it's good that everyone is thinking about this issue and how they can use procurement to impact sustainability at different stages. I think we can close that now, and I'm going to show you the results of a similar poll, which is conducted by UNEP. Excuse me. This poll was conducted in 2017 as part of the UNEP Global Survey on Sustainable Public Procurement. It was conducted among 201 participants from 62 countries, mostly procurement professionals. The labels are slightly different, but I just wanted to show you what the rest of the world thinks of the questions that you just answered, the survey you just took. Now, in this one, the development of requirements needs definition was the most popular choice, which actually is very similar to what you just voted on. And the second one is needs definition, i.e., writing the actual, development of requirements and technical specifications is the top ranked on 78, and needs definition, which we called initial consideration, is 69%. So those are quite close. Can we get the survey results back up on the screen, or is that not possible? Perhaps it's not possible. Oh, okay, there it is. Thank you. So let me compare those. So initial considerations, that's needs definition, 77% in our poll, 69% among 201 respondents from 62 different countries. Then the most popular one in the wider poll was the definition of technical specifications for the design of the procurement process. What's interesting, I think, is that very few people in our poll chose contract administration. It only got 4%. But as I said in the earlier in the wider poll, it got 25%. And as I said earlier in my opening remarks, if you don't actually manage the contractor's performance during contract implementation, then you may risk losing the sustainability developments that you got in the earlier stage. Now we're going to take a look at an overview of the procurement cycle from the point of view of sustainability. Okay, so we're going to go through each one, and for this I have 15 minutes. We're supposed to finish this by 10:35. I'm quite a bit late already, so I'll try to speed up. So I'm going to go through each stage of the procurement process now and talk about what are the procurement issues that you should be thinking about when you've got your sustainability hat on. So in this stage, you're actually defining what is the operational procurement need, identifying the sustainability risks and opportunities associated with this procurement. So of the three areas, economic, environmental, social, which ones can you pursue through this particular procurement, and what are the risks involved with buying something? We're going to talk about that later, but what are the risks of damaging a particular area of sustainability in a particular contract, and what are the opportunities for you to make a positive contribution through the way that you conduct this procurement? Obviously, you'll always be working in with your own legal and policy framework, and this is not a free-for-all, the thing that we're talking about today. These guidelines that we are helping OECS to develop do not have legal effect at this point. They may do later if your country incorporates them into their legal framework by primary or secondary legislation. They're pretty much about guidance, so you will have to work within your own legal framework. Understanding what the community needs in your country, that's extremely important. What are people actually concerned about? Which are the most important issues for your country and your community? They may include things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving water efficiency usage, and I know that's a big issue in Antigua and Barbuda. It's specifically highlighted in their National Sustainable Development Plan. Promoting the participation of micro and small and medium enterprises in public contracts. That's a big deal all over the Caribbean. Dominica actually has a draft law just about that. Reducing unemployment, achieving gender pay parity, or improving compliance with labor, health and safety laws. Any one of those and many other objectives may be achieved through a procurement transaction. So you have to think about which ones and in what order of priority. Very important to prioritize sustainability needs. You can't achieve everything at one stage, at one time. So which are the most pressing ones and how can you best achieve those through the procurement process? And where you have sustainability risks, it's important then to develop mitigation measures to try to reduce those risks. Then market research and procurement strategy. This is where you analyze the supply market for goods, works, and services that you're buying. And we already have a lot of that detail from the work that Jose did in the market readiness assessment. In the case of the OECS, of course, it's a little bit more complicated because most of your bidders are not producers or manufacturers. And you're generally dealing with local contractors. In the case of lumber, there is no domestic production. So almost all lumber is imported. So you'll actually be thinking not just about the bidder, but also behind the bidder. What is the supply chain behind them? And you'll be trying to influence the operation of the supply chain through the way that you design the procurement process. And also, who are the producers and manufacturers? Now, in the case of concrete blocks, all of the OECS countries have domestic production. Some have, all of them, I think, have cement processing plants. But they will not be the bidders in most cases for a civil works contract. So again, you need to think about how can you achieve your sustainability objectives vicariously through the bidder to the end, to the producer or the manufacturer of the goods and works that you're buying. And then defining sustainability impacts at each stage of the procurement plan, as I said, from extraction to delivery. It's very important that you can control that through the way you write the bidding document. And defining what are the sustainability benefits that you are expecting to achieve and how you can incorporate those into the procurement method. Into the procurement requirements. And choosing a procurement method. This, of course, will be governed by your national law. There are pluses and minuses of each. Open competitive bidding is the most difficult to control which bidders you're going to get. You, of course, will get bids of varying quality. That's why it's particularly important that you very closely define the technical requirements and the qualification requirements of the bidders. Only then can you fairly and transparently, as legally, throw out a bid that doesn't offer you the sustainability requirements that you're hoping to get from the procurement process. Restricted bidding gives you the advantage of choosing which bidders you invite. It's usually between 3 to 5 bidders. That gives you a lot more control because you're deciding which bidders you're going to invite. You can be sure that you choose bidders which you know have a good track record of working sustainably, excuse me. And single source procurement, of course, gives you the ultimate level of control, but it's not a free lunch because you still have to write the technical requirements correctly. You still have to make sure that you're choosing the right bidder. Now, I've gone with these 3 procurement methods because I think we're right in saying that all of the procurement laws in the OECS have these 3 procurement methods. Of course, there are others, but importantly, these are the 3 procurement methods which are included in the CARICOM Model Bill on Public Procurement. So they should be applicable to everyone participating in this webinar. Then you have to define the schedule of requirements, technical specifications, applicable quality standards, social labels such as labeling of lumber products. We're going to talk about that in great detail as we go on. And setting the minimum qualification requirements for the bidder and for the producer. So what is the bidder's past experience? Does he have the right workforce? Does he have a track record of violating labor laws, for example, in which case that's a problem that you'll have to deal with in bid evaluation. And what about the producers, their environmental record, for example, in illegal logging or logging sustainably, managing sustainable forests, and any ISO certifications that you want them to have. In bid evaluation, in some cases, you can do all mandatory requirements, which are pass-fail, i.e. if a bidder doesn't have it, you kick them out, they're non-responsive. Or you can have desirable requirements, and you can set both. You can say, these are my minimum requirements, and above those, I also have these other requirements that I'm hoping to achieve, and you can evaluate those as rating criteria and reward bidders who offer you more sustainable solutions. This is the last slide. So then you actually do the procurement, making sure you get the bidders you want, evaluation of price and non-price components to make sure that you get the maximum sustainability benefit in the areas that you have defined at the outset from the bidder that you award the contract to. Contract administration, it's absolutely essential that the sustainability commitments that the bidder made in his bid should be included into his contract as legally binding contractual commitments. And then it's your responsibility, perhaps also with the end user, to monitor the performance against the key performance indicators that you set in the contract. And verification of products, we will be talking about verification for each type of product when we get to that stage. Now, I think we have polling question number 2. Can we have it up on the screen, please? Okay, this is another quick poll. So before we start talking about lumber, we would like to ask you, which do you think are the sustainability objectives that might best be pursued in the procurement of lumber? Is it promotion of remembering that in the OECS, you import almost all your lumber? So is it the promotion of participation of MSMEs, improvement of water usage, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, reduction in environmental degradation, gender equality in employment, or protection of indigenous peoples? Again, you can choose up to 3, and we will start the poll now. Again, you have 1 minute. Okay, according to the stopwatch which I have running on my iPhone, we're at 1 minute. So can we see the results, please? Let's hope that the technology will be our friend. Oh, this is great. Everyone got the right answer by the look of things. Okay, so remembering that you're talking about logging and forest management and sustainable lumber production. And remembering also, very importantly, that in the OCS, you import almost all your lumber. The top one, with almost 100%, is reduction of environmental degradation. Absolutely right, I agree with that. The second one is a reduction in greenhouse gases, gas emissions, also extremely important. We're going to talk about the role that forests play in greenhouse gas emissions, in carbon sequestration. 47% is protection of indigenous peoples, absolutely right. A huge number of indigenous people live in forests and rely on them for their livelihoods, including for their food security. And the fourth one is promotion of MSMEs. Yes and no, because remember, if you're not producing lumber locally, then the MSMEs whose participation you will be promoting will be in the country from which you are importing the lumber. So that's not going to have any impact in your country if you're importing everything. Improvement in water usage, yeah, I think so. And then finally, gender equality in employment. Hard to control vicariously when the manufacturer of the lumber is outside the country. But that was very interesting. Thank you. We got some really good results, and I think shows that people are already very aware of what the issues are around lumber production. Keep checking my my running order to make sure that I'm keeping to time. Okay. So now we're going to talk about lumber, following on from the poll that we just took. And we'll go through the same stages, and we'll talk about what are the specific issues around sustainability when it comes to lumber. So these are the sustainability risks related to lumber. What we know about climate, first of all, is that trees cool the Earth's atmosphere by storing greenhouse gases. 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally are due to deforestation. Half of the Earth's natural forests are already disappeared, and we are losing 27 football field sizes worth of forest every minute, largely because of illegal logging. Lumber used in construction accounts for 25% of wood harvesting globally. That's very important. When you look at the previous bullet points of the impact of deforestation on forests, and also given the fact that 15% of global emissions come from deforestation, clearly cutting down wood, cutting down trees for lumber to use in construction is accounting for 25% of that, which means that we as purchasers of civil works contracts that include lumber have a responsibility for this, and that we have to think carefully about when we're procuring civil works. I don't mean to make you feel guilty, but I'd like to make you feel responsible in some way. Transportation of lumber consumes fossil fuels and contributes to global warming. Now, keep in mind, almost all your lumber is imported. Some of it from Guyana, most of it softwood from the USA, Guyana, Brazil, Honduras, Chile. Chile is a long way from the OECS. So if you are importing lumber and transporting it mostly, I guess, by sea over long distances, then de facto your contract is contributing to the consumption of fossil fuels and exacerbating global warming. So you import 85% of your lumber, 31, almost 32 million EC dollars imported by the 3 pilot countries in 2017, according to the trade data that Jose managed to get hold of. So that in itself is quite a sobering and severe thought process to go through about what lumber means in terms of its procurement by the OECS and how much you import and its impact on deforestation and therefore on greenhouse gas emissions. Another sustainability area that risk that lumber production contributes to is biodiversity, because 80% of the biodiversity that flora and fauna that lives on the earth is in forests. Clearly, it impacts indigenous peoples, as you rightly pointed out in your responses to the poll. 350 million indigenous people live in forests, and 1.6 billion people living in poverty rely on forests for their livelihood, and that includes for their food. Environmental impacts. Trees improve soil quality. They retain water. They regulate the flow of rivers, prevent flooding, and deforestation results in environmental degradation. Another key point that you pointed out in your responses to the poll. Lumber also impacts on human health, because much lumber is treated with toxic chemicals, which endangers human health, both at the point of production and at the point where you, as the user or the end user in your government, in your country, is actually handling the lumber. And we have some suggestions about how to mitigate that risk later on. And also, of course, there are construction risks. Poor quality lumber poses risks of structural failure, warping, insect infestation. My apologies for the typo, my responsibility. And I know from talking to people in all three of the pilot countries that whom we surveyed as part of this project, there is an issue with poor quality lumber. And I know the civil engineer, Antigua and Barbuda, to whom we spoke, said it's a problem there, the import of poor quality lumber. Next, market research and procurement strategy. What we found is that there are no major lumber producers in any of the three pilot countries participating in this project. In Antigua and Barbuda, there is no domestic production of lumber and no sustainable lumber alternatives available within the country. In Dominica, there is small-scale domestic production of lumber, mostly it's used for furniture. I know because I've met with the head of procurement in the Ministry of Education, and they buy all their furniture locally from one small-scale cottage industry manufacturer using local lumber. But there are no domestic sources of certified sustainable lumber in Dominica. In Grenada, also some small-scale production of lumber and limited domestic sources of certified sustainable lumber. Okay, now we know that most bidders on your contracts are domestic or regional, i.e. other OECS construction contractors, or other Caribbean, i.e. Barbados, for example, domestic, other regional contractors within the Caribbean outside the OECS. And they're all importing lumber to satisfy demand for public works contracts that OECS governments are awarding. So your procurement strategy needs to be built on understanding the bidders' existing supply chains. From where are they sourcing their lumber, and who are their producers? The design of the procurement method. We talked about this already, about the pros and cons of each of the procurement methods, so I'm not going to repeat that. You can specify in the bidding documents quality standards for lumber. And in the market readiness assessment, there was a lot of information about that. You can specify that you want to buy grade marked lumber. It's actually identified by the grade mark that's visible on the lumber, physically visible on the lumber. And that is specified actually in the OECS building code. You can also specify that you want to procure certified lumber and lumber from legal sources. You can require a chain of custody certification in the bidding documents, i.e. from the moment the tree is felled until the moment it reaches your construction site, where has it been, through whose hands has the lumber passed, and what has happened to it at each stage. That's extremely important in order to get the quality of lumber that you need at the end of the process. In terms of toxic chemicals, which we talked about earlier, you can specify that the lumber should be treated with greener wood preservatives, which are also specified in the OECS building code. So if you put that in your spec, you will be able to reject any bid that offers you lumber which has been treated with toxic chemicals, thereby avoiding or mitigating the risk to human health. We talked about greenhouse gas emissions. You can minimize the impacts of transportation on greenhouse gas emissions by procuring lumber from domestic markets where you have them. And as we know, domestic market for lumber is very limited, or from nearby sources. Now, this is also related to procurement method, because under open competitive bidding, you can't control that really. You can, for example, in Grenada, in the procurement law, they do have an option to limit participation to domestic bidders. So where you can limit participation, and you know that there is a domestic supplier, one or more, who can procure lumber domestically or from within the OECS, you may be able to control that variable. You may also be able to evaluate the greenhouse gas emissions caused by transportation as one of the criteria in the bid evaluation. Then doing the procurement, I would say it's certainly open for debate and discussion. We may get to it in the Q&A. For these two particular products, lumber and concrete blocks, price-only evaluation may work quite well, where the sustainability requirements can be clearly defined in the specification, and you specify the appropriate quality standards. We talked earlier about mandatory pass-fail requirements and desirable rated criteria. So if you have all of your specification and your applicable quality standards clearly specified in the bidding document, you could still get a positive outcome simply by evaluating on price among responsive bidders, because then you have the option, as I said earlier, to reject a bid that doesn't offer you the sustainability benefits that you want and doesn't meet your tech spec and your quality standards. Also, you could go into evaluation based on rating criteria. This is most appropriate, I would say, in some of the social areas. So gender pay equality, youth employment, those are things which are probably best. So if you're not requiring social benefits in your specification, you could probably get away with evaluating on price. But if you are requiring any of the softer sustainability benefits in your bidding document, then you're probably going to end up doing bid evaluation based on non-price criteria with a rated scoring system. And in that case, you would give additional points in bid evaluation to a bidder that's offering you a higher level of social benefit. For example, you may ask for a minimum number of 25 youths being employed on a construction contract, and then bidders may be able to offer more than that. And the bidder offering the highest to employ the highest number of youths in their construction contract would then get the maximum evaluation points, and the other bidders offering fewer employment opportunities would get fewer points in evaluation. So that the way that you design that really comes back to the very first stage in the procurement process are what are the sustainability priorities that you're hoping to serve through this procurement process. Now, sustainable lumber, I know, is not widely specified in the OECS. So we need to be careful that when, as procurement specialists, when we start to recommend this to our end users, that we don't engender resistance to sustainability by having like a big bang approach where everything should be sustainable lumber from day one. I don't think that's realistic. It would probably not work well in the Caribbean. So you could put in a percentage of the overall quantity should be sustainable lumber. And again, bidders offering higher percentages of sustainable lumber in their bids would get rewarded for that in bid evaluation. The means of verification for lumber are the grade mark that's visible in the lumber itself, certified wood with forest management certification, and a sustainable chain of custody certification, all of which are well-known, globally recognized certification standards. And legal source certificate, or forest, FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council controlled wood standards, and a certificate of origin for imported lumber. Now, I think we have another polling question before we go on to concrete blocks? Okay, so before we discuss concrete blocks, we're going to ask you, again, before we start, thinking about the procurement of concrete blocks, what do you think are the sustainability objectives that might best be pursued in the procurement of concrete blocks, keeping in mind that there is extensive domestic production, and in fact, almost all of your production in some cases is domestic. In some cases, like Grenada, it's a mix of domestic and imported, mostly from, I think, Trinidad and Tobago or Grenada, or excuse me, or Guyana. So thinking about that, which sustainability objectives do you think would be best promoted or achieved in concrete block production? Is it the promotion of MSMEs, improvement of water usage, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, reduction in pollution, gender equality in employment, or enforcement of labor laws? And again, you will have 1 minute starting now. Okay, we're at 1 minute. So can we have the poll results up, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. So which is the most popular? Reduction of pollution. Okay, that's very important. Quite a few that are also strong contenders. Promotion of MSMEs, absolutely, because most of this production is domestic. It's either small scale industrial or it's cottage industry, mom and pop type operations producing concrete blocks locally in each of the OECS countries. So you definitely have the opportunity to promote MSME participation. Improvement in water usage, absolutely right. Producing concrete blocks is very intensive on water. So there are issues around from where do the producers access the water, and what do they do with it in the production process, how much do they use, and then how they dispose of it, dirty water, after they've finished. Reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, also important. Enforcement of labor laws, of course, especially in small scale industrial and mom and pop type operations. You do have the opportunity to make sure that labor laws are being respected, and health and safety laws as part of labor laws. Gender equality, of course, you have the opportunity to control the workforce that the local manufacturer is using. So I think all of those are very, very good answers. And we're going to look now at how we're going to move on to talk about the same, reviewing the procurement cycle, but for concrete blocks. Let me just check how we're doing on time. We're at 10:57. According to the agenda, we were just supposed to talking about this at 10:05. So we've made up some time. Either that or I'm speaking too quickly. If I am, please tell me so. Slow me down. My voice is going already. Let's hope I can make it for the next hour. Okay. Sustainability risks related to the production of concrete blocks. First of all, concrete blocks are made of 4 different components: aggregate or gravel, cement, sand, and water. So we present this as one product, but it's actually 4. And the four of them create different sustainability risks and present you with different sustainability opportunities. Cement, first of all, is the largest manufactured product on Earth by mass. In the Caribbean, construction, mining, and transportation sectors account for 35% of national GDP on average. And so this is a major industry in the Caribbean. Production of concrete blocks uses aggregate or gravel. Most of it is locally mined. Almost all of it is locally mined. And all of the countries that we surveyed have mining operations, quarrying, that produces aggregate and gravel used in the production of concrete blocks, sand, cement, and water. Cement is heavily used in construction in the OECS, according to the Chief Technical Officer of the Ministry of Infrastructure Development in Grenada, to whom we spoke. 90% of the houses in Grenada are constructed using cast-in-place concrete or poured concrete, not concrete in bags. The concrete in bags is also heavily used throughout the OECS. In terms of the climate risk of the production of cement, cement production releases between 5 and 6% of all carbon dioxide generated by human activity, and accounts for 4% of global warming. Use of water resources, including water scarcity and protecting existing water resources. Concrete block production is water intensive. It creates risks associated with access. See, I said this in the last slide. I'm way ahead of myself. That's because I wrote the slides, so I know what's coming up about the access to, use, and disposal of water. And in 2012, the last year for which we were able to find data, the production of concrete accounted for 9% of industrial water use globally. So this is a heavily water-intensive production process. Quarrying of aggregates can harm water quality and damage aquifers. I think we know that very well. And quarrying produces a lot of other sustainability risks as well. Okay, risks for the environment. Cement production releases persistent organic pollutants, such as dioxins, heavy metals, and particles. Persistent means they hang around in the atmosphere for a very long time once they're released. And the extraction of sand and gravel exceeds natural replenishment rates. And it obviously contributes to coastal erosion. Now, excuse me. Okay, we know that in the OECS there's an issue around the extraction of sand. Grenada, for example, has banned the export of sand. All of the sand used in Grenada construction is imported because of the issues they've had with sand, particularly with beaches. The impact of concrete block production on human health, noise, air vibration, dust resulting from concrete production and transportation. If you've ever driven past a quarry or a cement production plant, you'll have come across the big, heavy, noisy lorries producing a lot of dust and filth in the air. So these are real environmental impacts that that impact human health. And for example, in Grenada, the biggest quarry on the island is right next to one of the most important cultural sites and cultural heritage sites on the island. So there are issues there around impact also on the natural environment and on the protection of cultural assets. Quarrying of aggregates produces noise, loss of habitat for flora and fauna, and damage to natural assets. There are, of course, risks surrounding labor conditions, health and safety of workers, particularly in quarrying, which of course involves blasting, and concrete production plants. Excuse me. And the extraction of sand, of course, has an impact on the economy because it impacts beach tourism. which is a huge percentage of the economy in all of your countries. And as we pointed out in the survey, you got that absolutely right. There is an opportunity to promote the participation of domestic producers, including small and medium enterprises in local production. Market research, procurement strategy. I'll try not to repeat myself. You know most of this already. There is one very important point, that cement is not produced anywhere in any of the 3 pilot countries. You may know of cement production in your country, but it's not common in the OECS. So all cement is imported, mainly from Trinidad. There is that one big cement producer on the island of Trinidad, TCL, and from Colombia. So everybody is importing cement over long distances. And cement, of course, is one of the key components in the manufacture of concrete blocks. Transportation of imported cement contributes to the greenhouse gas emissions. Not much you can do about that when you have no domestic production of cement, but you could, for example, procure from sources which are less distant from your islands. The value of cement imports by the 3 pilot countries was 29.5 million EC dollars in 2007. So this is economically very important. And 3 of the 4 components in concrete blocks are produced locally. As I said, cement is not produced anywhere in the 3 pilot countries, with the exception of sand in Grenada. And so there is domestic production of concrete blocks going on in all the countries. And that is important because it gives you greater leverage to use your purchasing power to influence domestic production, including things like sustainable practices, water use, labor practices. It's more difficult for you to do that with lumber because you're importing everything, well, almost everything, 85%. So it is actually more difficult for you to control how a lumber producer in the US or in Guyana or in Chile, for example, even more so, is managing their operation, how they're going about the process of lumber production. But with concrete block production, you certainly have control over 3 of the components, less so over cement, but you could think about given that you know who your bidders are, from where are they importing cement? You are relying on your bidders to make wise choices in terms of what they include in their bid. You know that they will be importing cement from where. If you understand your bidders' supply chains, then you have a better chance of controlling, awarding to a bidder who is importing over shorter distances. And of course, you also have a lot of control over where domestic contractors are buying their blocks from and from which domestic producers. And as I said, through the way that you write the specification, and particularly the way you write the qualification criteria for the producer, you can control that. Now remember, in bid evaluation, you look at the bid and the bidder separately. So on the one hand, you're evaluating the bid and what the bid is offering you. On the other hand, you're setting qualification requirements for the bidder, not just the bidder who is the company that submits the bid, but the bidders behind them, the quarry that they are procuring from, the concrete production plant from which they're buying. And you can set, in the bidding document, you can set requirements for all of those variables all the way through the supply chain to make sure that you're making, that the bidder is making wise, sustainable choices on your behalf on the way that he designs his bid. And that is a very important part of supplier development, which I know is just starting in the OECS. They have done some work on that in Grenada, where they've been talking to suppliers to find out more about how they can move them towards making more sustainable choices in the way that they write their bids. That's a really big issue in the OECS. Designing the procurement process itself. There's a lot of valuable information in the market readiness assessment report that Jose prepared about exactly this issue. As a purchaser, you can specify products that meet applicable quality standards for the major inputs into concrete block production. The ASTM quality standard, which is the American Society for Technical Materials, excuse me, I may have got that wrong, is actually referenced in the OECS building code. And CrossQ, which is the CARICOM regional standards body, has defined a Caribbean regional standard for cement. You can drop those into your bidding document, and immediately you will be achieving a more sustainable outcome if you insist that bidders and the goods that they offer you comply with those standards. In each of the cases, the National Bureau of Standards have adopted or in the process of adopting CrossQ standards. Or in the case of Grenada, the Bureau of Standards has its own cement standard. So these standards are well known and are in the public domain. There is also an ASTM standard for aggregates, which is also referenced in the OECS building code. And we know that you can specify, for example, in quarrying of aggregates, it's important that there isn't, sustainability in aggregates is a bit more difficult to specify. And we may bring Jose, our technical expert, in on that during the Q&A session. But you could, for example, require that quarries from which gravel and aggregates are produced as part of the production process for concrete blocks, that they employ sustainable quarrying practices. And there is a global movement ongoing towards the employment of sustainable quarrying practices. I don't think it's caught on yet in the OECS, but there is a lot of knowledge out there elsewhere in the world from which we can learn. So in the bidding document, you could specify each of these standards for each of the products that go into making concrete blocks. And you could put those in as a mandatory criterion, pass-fail. A bidder that offers you goods that meets these standards will immediately be evaluated as responsive in respect of the standard, and a bidder that does not will fail. Now, we need to talk to the end users, of course, because I understand that these standards are not being fully used across the OECS, but there is an opportunity to increase their usage. You could include in the specification, in the schedule of requirements and the bill of quantities, and in the qualification criteria, you could impose requirements for improved sustainability of extraction. We talked about quarrying example already. And we talked about supplier management, giving domestic bidders adequate time to diversify their supply chains, and domestic producers, including quarry operators, concrete production plants, time to transition to a more sustainable procurement practice. This is a medium to long-term undertaking, I would say. Most quarry operators and concrete production plants, which are already in operation, are not going to change their practices overnight. But you, as the government, are the biggest game in town when it comes to being the biggest purchaser, spending the most money on civil works, both through your domestic budget and also through projects which are financed by multilateral development banks, such as the Caribbean Development Bank and the World Bank. So you have the power to move markets. Particularly, I think, in my experience, in smaller countries, the governments have even greater power to move markets because you decide how you spend your money. You decide what products you purchase and how you want them to be produced. So you can gradually introduce these requirements into bidding documents and signal to the bidders, not just the bidders, but also to the producers and the manufacturers, how you want to change these products over time. Certainly, and we talked about this actually in the poll, and many of you voted for this. In concrete block production, there are certainly opportunities to promote social gains, reduction of youth unemployment, provision of apprenticeships, involvement of more women in contract performance, That could be either in the production process of concrete blocks, or it could be in the construction process of the actual civil works as they're ongoing, and improvement of labor and health and safety laws. Implementing procurement approach to bid evaluation is similar. As I said, if you're pursuing social objectives, you will not be using price only. You will be using rated criteria where you're evaluating price and non-price criteria. You should state the quality standards, which I've mentioned earlier, as mandatory requirements. A bid offering one or more of the products that fails to meet the standard. And remember, there are 4 components to these products. Would be evaluated as non-responsive and rejected, where you state the requirement is mandatory. So price-only evaluation is less likely to work well where you're going after social benefits. As I said, if you're getting down to the point where you're making specifications for how the extraction process works, how the production process works, then you would be more likely to use rated criteria to control each of those variables. Well, as I said, so generally based on the application of rated criteria. For verification of these products, whether or not they actually achieve the sustainability objectives you were hoping for, compliance can be achieved through specifying that the product should meet specific national, regional, or international standards, including, for example, the cross-security quality standard for cement. Or in the more esoteric areas like greenhouse gas emissions, there isn't really it's more difficult for that. You really would be relying on the bidder or his manufacturer to self-declare and to provide a self-declaration in his bid, or you could have third-party verification of the bidder's production process or quarrying process by an expert third party. Concrete blocks. So assessment of sustainability impacts. This is the last stage after you've done the procurement, after you've done the procurement and the contract has been implemented. How did you do? Did you actually achieve the sustainability gains that you designed at the very beginning of the process and that you were hoping to achieve? So at that point, the end user, perhaps with your help as a procurement officer, you would need to compare the actual impacts with the expected impacts for each particular contract. And this can be done on a unit basis. For example, greenhouse gases, there is a well-established methodology for measuring greenhouse gas emissions, including their cost in financial terms. Other variables such as biodiversity, pollution, health, social, they're more difficult. We're not going to talk about that now. I certainly can't talk about them because I'm not an expert in this area, but UNEP has worked extensively on measuring and communicating the benefits of sustainable public procurement and measuring the impacts of sustainability in procurement. And we would refer you rather to these 2 publications, the links for which are included in the presentation. So we now have arrived at the Q&A session. We were due to get there at 11:35 and we're now at 11:16. So I must have been really speaking too fast. I will go back to Myrtle as our chair. We have lots of time for questions and answers and discussions. I will now mute myself and hand back to Myrtle.
Okay, Sean, it means that we have a little more time for questions from those on with us. So I am opening now for questions. I know a lot has been discussed, so I'm opening up for questions from our participants.
Do we have any questions in the chat? Has someone been monitoring the chat while I've been talking?
It's mainly the names they've been included in the chat. Those of you who possibly do not want to speak, you're invited to submit your questions in the chat. And just a reminder that everybody who's on, please indicate your name, position, and country so that we could have an indication of everyone who is attending this session. Any questions? And specifically our participating member states, Antigua, Dominica, Grenada. Any questions? And I know on today are some of our participants on the Sustainable Public Procurement course. So this is an opportunity. Sean is with us for a limited period of time. So while he's here, he can take our questions.
And it's an opportunity for the participants in that course to demonstrate their new knowledge.
Yes.
Myrtle, I see that Kamaria has her hand raised.
Kamaria, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for your presentations. Just a quick question. I know in the very first presentation, we all agreed that it is best to include sustainability criteria in the initial phase. But my question is there any stage in that cycle that it's too late to add the sustainability criteria?
Yes, when you publish the bidding document, when you come to do the procurement process itself, it's too late. You let me go back to the first graphic. Excuse me. This one. So the sourcing process, I would stage number 4. That's where you're actually conducting the procurement. So by that stage, you've written the specification. You've decided in the early stage which sustainability benefits you want to achieve or to pursue through this procurement process. You've done your research. You know how the market will broadly how the market may respond to your stimuli. Then you're writing. This is the key part: the definition of technical specifications for the goods. So those 3 stages are where you have most influence. And then the sourcing process, by the time you go out to bid, you made your decision then, you specified what it is you want to buy. I suppose you could issue an amendment to the bidding documents, but it would be rather messy and would probably send confusing signals to the bidders. And if we look at that survey, the global survey that we looked at earlier, you'll see that the much wider group, I think, agrees with us that the development of requirements and technical specifications, which in our graphic is stage number 3, defining specifications, that is your point of maximum leverage. And then the second one was needs definition, which is initial considerations. The labels don't match, but defining needs and what your sustainable priorities are. Those are the 2 key points of leverage. By the time you get to doing procurement, I think it's already too late.
Okay, opening up again for any further questions. I see Gail Imhoff. Can you go ahead and ask a question?
Hi, morning, everyone. Thanks for your presentation, Sean. I just want to have a question, but I need to put it in context. I'm not looking at it from the procurement cycle process necessarily. I'm trying to place this information within the context of national development planning. So my question to you, Sean, is what factors would of this sustainable procurement that you're going through here would make it a good sell for integration in national development policy? I'm thinking of, yes, we have our commitments as a country under the Paris Agreement. On the one hand, I'm not sure of the cost implications necessarily if sustainable procurement necessarily means higher costs. I mean, it will be a change in processes locally. So there will be some change management. There will be, you'd have to convince persons to go this way. So I'm looking at it from the point of view of integrating this at the national policy level. And my question is just that, how do we sell sustainable procurement at a national policy level?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. In the initial assessment that we did, which was shared in one of the earlier webinars, we actually reviewed the national sustainable development strategies of the 3 pilot countries and indeed the OECS itself. And we looked at the main priorities that they set. And every single one of them was achievable through procurement. For example, I'll mention something I mentioned earlier. Antigua and Barbuda in its development plan describes itself as a water-constrained country. Well, there's quite large-scale production of concrete blocks going on in Antigua and Barbuda using a lot of water. So you could serve the objective of conserving water and improving water usage through the procurement of concrete blocks used in construction. All of the other sustainable development objectives, I think, are definitely achievable in part, or procurement can certainly contribute to them. Jamaica, for example, has an MSME policy. Dominica is considering one, and it's almost entirely achieved or targeted through public procurement. Both Jamaica and Dominica have designed their MSME promotion schemes based on set-asides. They actually reserve a certain percentage of contracts for award to micro and small medium enterprises. I think we have someone online from Jamaica. It's Kenisha Tom Eaton. If you want to speak, you'd be very welcome. But I can tell you what I know about the Jamaica scheme, because we had the director of procurement in one of the earlier webinars, Andre Bennett. And so in Jamaica, they have set aside 25% of public contracts by number of contracts, not by value, for MSMEs, and where they can establish that they have at least 2 local MSMEs who are capable of performing the contract, then they are legally obliged to have a competitive process between those 2 MSMEs to the exclusion of all other bidders, so that they guarantee that they award the contract to one of the 2 MSMEs. Or of course, if they have more than 2, then they would have a more competitive process. Dominica, I have seen the draft law. It's also based on set-asides, but I'm not sure if it has that same requirement of the minimum of 2 qualified local bidders. So given that MSME promotion is one of the sustainable objectives of almost all the OECS, absolutely it can be achieved through public procurement. I would say principally through public procurement. Kamaria, would you like to talk about the sustainability priorities of Antigua and Barbuda, and which ones you think could be served through public procurement? Kamaria is still with us.
Hi, Sean. Sure. I will in a minute, but I will give Helena. Helena, are you on the call? I will give Helena a chance to address it first, and then I'll address it from the perspective of the project. Helena, are you there? Okay, she might have left the call. Yeah, so with respect, and from the Department of Environment, from our end, we're looking at it primarily with respect to our national determined contributions, and the entire environmental program in our UNF triple C and Paris Agreement obligations. So from a national perspective, as we think about the public procurement cycle, we have to ensure not just for our donors, but also for the Antigua's environmental program and how we intend to contribute to combating climate change, what aspects of the procurement cycle we need to ensure that, you know, the policies or the procedures that we go to do not adversely impact our fight against climate change. So we have been looking at ensuring at a national level that our procurement processes do not counteract where we're going environmentally. One of the key things that you would have addressed that came out of your bilaterals with Antigua is the water usage. That is a big thing that we have to look at here in Antigua, simply because we're a very dry country. We're highly dependent on desalination. And as we look at the production of especially concrete blocks here in Antigua, we have to look at our water usage. Another thing is our quarrying practices and sand mining. We used to do extensive sand mining here in Barbuda, and that is now discontinued, and we're now importing more environmentally produced sand. We get most of our sand from Montserrat at this point. So I think looking at our general environmental program and how we, you know, how our procurement practices align with the commitments that we have made to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, that is how we're looking towards adding these key sustainability criteria for our bigger construction projects here on island.
Thank you. Yes, while you were talking, I actually brought up the readiness assessment, which we published earlier, which looked at the sustainable development priorities of each of the 3 pilot countries. And according to the medium-term development strategy of Antigua and Barbuda, improvement of the natural environment was one of the important priorities. And the other one is protection of historical and cultural assets. Both of those, I think, are potentially impacted by concrete block production. Dominique,
add something?
Sure, go ahead.
No, sorry, I cut you. If you haven't finished, please.
No, please go ahead, Farid. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks. No, so that's an excellent question, and what I understood is, the way I understood it is, how do we sell sustainable procurement to decision makers, mainly? So indeed, the response is by highlighting the opportunities of achieving SDGs. So this means more resource efficiency. Kamaria mentioned the issue of water, so we can reduce really consumption of water. And this means also allowing MSMEs to access public procurement. And this will also contribute to achieving some SDGs, especially women-owned businesses, for example. But I wanted to highlight another important point to get the buy-in, is really to say that through SPP you can make savings, you can save money. It's not necessarily more expensive. Okay, so and you can save, especially if you're reducing, for example, your electricity bill. If you procure an energy efficient electrical or electronic appliances, you take refrigerators, you take air conditioners. There are really big savings to be made there by shifting to more energy efficient goods and services. And the last point is innovation and competitiveness. We can really promote innovation. We can make sure that local MSMEs become champions in certain areas. For example, on energy, on circular economy, on processing, for example, or the reuse of the goods, disposal of the goods. And there is, I think, capabilities in the region that need to be used and promoted through sustainable procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid.
Thank you. I think
I'm going to sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying I'm seeing Gail Imhoff's hands are still up. I'm not sure if she has another question.
Yes, sorry about that. I had the question, which I think the last speaker, I'm not sure his name, Farid, addressed, because I think
Yeah,
at the end of the day, in terms of, and I really hate to be this person, yes, I really hate to be this person, but I think at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, it will really come down to the cost implications. So I wanted that to be addressed, which I think Farid did.
I did, and I
So
can add that. What's your name? Sorry,
Gail.
Gail, yeah, Gail, and also the second opportunity is to do what we call life cycle costing, or at least total cost of ownership. You know, really compare the bids in terms of not only acquisition price, but then the running cost, this is disposal cost, if we can. And in the future, thanks to Camaria and the EDA, we'll be able to monetize also externalities like greenhouse gas emissions, the cost of producing greenhouse gases, and incorporating that in our bids evaluation. And this will change the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid. I think there are one or two questions, and I will ask Sean. The question is it possible to pursue sustainability objectives through public procurement in the absence of a public procurement framework that supports sustainable public procurement?
Yes, I think it is. I'm not aware of any procurement law that specifically prohibits sustainability. Typically, in the OECS, most procurement laws don't really go into great detail about sustainability. You will generally see the objective of a procurement law. One of the objectives would be promotion of local industry, industrial development, or protection of the environment. That's certainly in the law of Grenada, and it's in the draft law of Dominica. Nothing like that is mentioned in the current Tenders Board Act of Antigua and Barbuda, but I understand it's in the new draft law, which is currently being prepared. Only Grenada among OECS countries has a specific legally binding policy on sustainable public procurement. But the fact that you don't have an SPP policy does not constrain you from pursuing sustainability benefits. You can do all the things that we talked about in the webinar this morning without specific mention, without there being specifically mentioned in the procurement law. For example, the way you do bid evaluation, all the things that I've talked about are in the evaluation criteria of most of the laws that I'm familiar with in the OECS. They all talk about evaluation of price and non-price criteria. So you can apply those criteria from your law in a way that enhances sustainability. And I don't think that would be a constraint on anyone in the OECS at the moment.
Thank you, Sean. And I suppose we can consider some of the benefits as has been indicated earlier. And based on what we know, there are benefits, environmental benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, including sustainable public procurement considerations. One other question is that we want to look at what are the low-hanging fruit with respect to lumber and concrete blocks, and what is the easiest approach for integrating sustainability considerations?
You want me to answer that, Myrtle?
Yes, it's at you.
Okay, well, lumber is, I think it's clearly putting in grade mark, which is already in the OECS standard in the building code. So in fact, it already applies in the OECS, making sure that the requirement for grade mark is actually included in the specification for lumber in all bidding documents is a quick and simple and very effective way of achieving sustainability requirements in the short term. Now, there has been some research done to come back to the point about price and resistance of some users to worrying about prices. We did look into that as part of the earlier stages of the project. We were not able to find any empirical evidence that sustainable lumber is more expensive than non-sustainable lumber. There's nothing out there. There's no empirical evidence supporting that supposition. So we think the price difference is negligible. On concrete blocks, well, it's.
Can I compliment?
Go ahead, please.
Yes,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. Yes, but one important issue regarding sustainability on lumber is the market or the producers have been integrating those aspects into their production for many years. It means this is not like a new aspect for lumber. This is something very well developed around the world. And if you see the number or the number of companies which are already producing certified wood, it's a huge industry. And as Sean said, we didn't find a proper study to compare certified lumber with not certified lumber. But in previous research, I had the opportunity to work to compare paper, certified paper and not certified paper, and prices were almost the same. And the main reason behind that is, as I say, the market has been developing this or has been integrating this kind of certification into their production, and for reason prices are quite the same. Of course, in a first step, suppliers must be work to integrate those requirements into their with their suppliers, and then it will represent a higher price at the beginning, but maybe it can be most related with speculation more than a real difference in prices. But this is something the market is working, and it's highly possible that the prices will be quite the same from certified and not certified lumber.
Okay, thanks, Jose. Sean, do you want to add anything?
Yes, on the second point about, so we talked about lumber. I would also answer the same question in respect of concrete blocks. Coming at the question from the opposite angle, the hardest part to control, of course, is the imported cement, because cement is not produced anywhere in the OECS, so you can't control that. What you can control are the other components, sand, gravel, aggregate, and water. One very quick way would be to procure locally, so that you're not incurring the penalties of transportation in terms of its impact on the environment and greenhouse gas emissions. So where you are able to procure locally, you can do that. And certainly, I think the social benefits, employment, gender, pay, labor conditions, health and safety in your local production operations, those are things which you could control quite not without too much difficulty through the procurement process. And finally, just specifying the appropriate standards for cement, the cross-Q standard for cement, or your own National Bureau of Standards standard, and the Astm standard for aggregate, which is also in the OECS building code. Incorporating those into the bidding documents starting tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, it's a Saturday, but starting next week, would be a quick and easy way to make some sustainability progress in respect of concrete blocks.
Okay, I think Camira, your hand is up. Do you have another question?
Yes, Sean, I have a question. I'm not sure how you can answer it, but I'm just thinking, piggybacking on what Gail said about it down to, based on your experience, imposing the sustainability criteria on, the purchase or procurement of construction materials, do you have a range of what percentage increase in cost, upfront cost it would be to ensure that we procure our lumber or concrete blocks, including these sustainability criteria? And then back to Gail, what percentage addition do you think the government would be willing to absorb if we were to add the sustainability criteria? So essentially, if it's going to be a 50% addition to use to procure them in a more sustainable way, do you think that's too much to ask of the government, or would the government consider it? Is there like a minimal? Is there a ceiling? Just thinking through the process.
Well, I think there are several people on this call who could help to answer that question. I think we talked earlier about lumber. We were not able to find any empirical evidence anywhere in the world that sustainable lumber is more expensive than poor quality lumber, nor non-sustainable lumber. And remember, the opportunity cost of procuring poor quality lumber is, the risks of failure and insect infestation, which have already been mentioned by your colleague John Jenkins, is it in Antigua and Barbuda. So there is an opportunity, a cost to not procuring sustainable lumber. And as far as we know, there is no increased cost of doing so. On concrete block production, I'm not aware of any evidence on price variations. Fareed, are you aware of anything from your work in other countries? I'm sure we still have Fareed online.
I'm not aware.
Okay. Jose, could you do you want to chip in on that, please?
Yes, I can. I think if when we think regarding on prices on sustainable products, we can divide that in different kind of products. If we think, for instance, in cleaning products, products to clean, we have evidence that the price could be higher because the components, like the environmental components, are more expensive. If we think, as I said before, in paper, we cannot see main differences. When we go through, for instance, electronic products and sustainability on electronic products, we can see, if we consider the life of the product, maybe the cost could be a little bit higher at the beginning, but the cost, that higher price will be compensated in the reduction of energy consumption in the long term. But here, when we talk about construction materials, this is a quite more difficult assessment. First of all, criteria or sustainable criteria are divided. First, we have the quality criteria. It's possible that a concrete block producer will charge a higher price because they need to have this kind of certification. Yes, probably, because those kind of certifications, which are working on quality, they will represent that producer some extra effort to deal with those requirements. How much they will charge, this is a very difficult answer for us. But at the same time, we can consider that the house, the school, which are built with those better quality products, will have a longer life. Then this is something, for this kind of materials, is not an easy answer, Camaria. And also we can consider other approach to the sustainable criteria which were presented. In some cases, sustainability on public procurement is an opportunity to send a message to the market and to start to work in coordination with other departments of your governments. You know, when we talk about, for instance, a gender equality, then of course, if you are going to ask those suppliers to have like a policy, to have half man, half woman, whatever, then this is a different approach than sending them a message saying, okay, you need to consider this point. If you have a declaration, self-declaration, whatever, or if you attend to a government training on gender equality, you will have like extra 2 points on the tender. Anything like that is a good opportunity. Then we need to, I propose that we need to think those criteria in a step-by-step process and with a long-term approach. And that will be and then we will be able to see how the public procurement can help to get other objectives, you know. And this is the real opportunity behind sustainability on public procurement. For prices, of course, here again, for instance, the concrete block production, we can send a message to those producers saying, okay, you need to have like a plan. You need to review which are your environmental impacts. You need to go to a training on our government saying, which are the impacts on these kind of things, or with an NGO, whatever. Then for me, it's not clear. We cannot say which will be the different prices, and also the idea will. I would like to propose that is thinking that in a long-term approach, step by step, talking with your suppliers, coordinating this process with the other departments of your government, and talking with the suppliers. You know, this is an opportunity to reduce environmental impacts and to get social impacts through the public procurement.
Jose, I just wanted to add for consideration based on the question that Kamaria asked, because as we notice that we've been having more natural disasters and they impact our infrastructure. And if we look at what happened in Dominica, it means that it makes sense to ensure the quality of the construction material so that we can build better to withstand the intensity of some of the natural disasters like hurricanes. So it may be a consideration as governments we know have limited financing. As we know, sometimes, well, for sustainable public procurement, you may spend a little more, but when you look at the value in the long term, it's far greater. So that's one of the considerations that you can look at when you are considering the price initially.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Michael. This is, but this is a evaluation which can be done in the future, you know. But this is true. We don't have the numbers. It is to say, okay, if you buy these better quality concrete blocks, you will have this cost now, and then you will have this. You will save this money in the future because that school will not be destroyed by the hurricane. But this is something is real, and it's something which can be assessed and evaluated in the future.
Certainly.
If I may come back on that, Myrtle, I think coming back to Kamari's question, it really depends on the domestic situation in the country, which of course you need to understand. Some of these changes would be cost neutral. For example, employing more women in the workforce or employing more youth in the workforce. That's cost neutral, assuming that the contractor would be paying the same rate. So you can achieve that fairly easily, and then you get the benefit of having more women or more youth in the workforce. However, if you have a gender pay gap, and I don't have that information in my head about whether or not that's an issue in the OECS, it's a big issue in other parts of the world. I know in the UK, I participated in a webinar with run by the Oxford University Blavatnik School of Government on Wednesday this week, where this was also about sustainable procurement, where they said that the gender pay gap in construction in procurement of works contracts in the UK is 22%. Women being paid 22% less than men. I don't know if that's an issue in the Caribbean. It may well be, but if you are requiring contractors to increase the pay of women to the same as that of men, then yes, that is going to precipitate an increase in the contractor's costs. So then you have to, weigh the increased cost of that. Presumably, if you are forcing them to raise their pay rates for a certain group of workers, then they would pass that cost on to you. But then you have to weigh that against the social benefit that you get of women being paid equal with men, which is a very important social issue, and also increased taxing revenues that you will get from those women in the workforce. So I think much of it you need to disaggregate these questions, because each one of these questions has several moving parts, and you need to understand how they work in your country in order to be able to make informed decisions.
Thank you, Sean. I think we're just 1 minute away from our question and answer time slot, so I will invite the final question. If there are any other questions from our participants. Okay, so Sean, we want to thank you very much for all of the work that you have done in the member states. I know the OECS appreciates the work that you have done, and our colleagues in Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, they benefited directly. And I know some of our other member states have benefited from the work that you have done in our member states. So we are grateful for all the work that you have done and sharing the information with us today. And so we just want to say a special thank you. We know your time on this project is limited. And we just want to acknowledge the work that you have done. And so right now, with that said, we are at the last part of our agenda this morning, which is the closing remarks. And I would like to call on Farid to deliver these closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Myrtle. OECS and you are not the only ones who are happy with the work done by Sean. I think we share really satisfaction, and we'd like to thank him for, in particular, this very rich and informative training that he has delivered today, and which was attended by over 40 participants. I think we have 46 participants. Well, this includes us also, so we can say 40, which is really a great number. And I'm really pleased also by the exchange we had in the Q&A session, which shows that there is really an interest in the subject, and that we have also a reflection, strategic reflection on this topic. As you mentioned, Myrtle, the training comes after a series of activities which have taken place since November 20, status assessments, market readiness, model policy, action plans, in addition to 3 very informative webinars. I would like to stress the high quality of all the outputs delivered by the team of consultants, Jose and Sean. However, this quality wouldn't have been achieved without the excellent partnership with the OECS, with your organization, and with the IDA project. So I'd like to thank you, Myrtle and Kamaria, for your continuous support. And also, we wouldn't have achieved such a good performance without the great follow-up and support and dedication of Agnes to this project. Really, I would like to thank her warmly, for yeah, her amazing job she did. But also, we shouldn't forget Judy, who did was amazing also in terms of assistance, very discreetly but very effectively. So thanks a lot, Judy. Very appreciated. And I hope that, dear participants, that you really enjoyed the training today. However, if you feel that you're not still fully knowledgeable on the subject, it's completely normal. Don't worry. We consider the session today as an introduction to the topic and are working on a more in-depth course that hopefully we'll be able to deliver in the future. So thanks again to all, and I look forward to a continuation of our fruitful cooperation in the future.
Thank you, Farid, and just want to expressly to express OECS's appreciation to UNEP for this collaboration, because we would not have been here at this juncture without UNEP's expertise and how you have so expertly conducted this project, implemented this project. So we are very happy with the product so far, and we just want to again thank UNEP for this very great collaboration. And so as you've already thanked Judy, she assisted us in bringing things together and having this webinar. So special thanks to Judy and all of the participants, the participating member states, everybody who's on today. We are very grateful that you're on. So thank you. And with that said, we wish you a good day, the rest of the day, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.